In hospital?
Yes, she's got to have an operation. Oh, what did I do? Oh, oops, what did I do? What did I do? Oh no, I'm back. Yeah, I'm back. Okay.
I think we're all back, just about.
I had to get Asher to come and help me get so that I could see you after I've been visiting my husband.
Baruch Hashem. What's up with Brian? Is he okay?
No, he's got to have a hip replacement. He fell yesterday.
Oh, it's time for good news. Davam
So,
v'suras tovas, yeshua refuah shalema.
but we've had good news as well.
Go on.
David Simcha is engaged to
Baruch
a young
Hashem.
lady in
Very,
Israel.
very nice. Who's the lucky girl?
Noah Aras.
Local?
Noah. No, what's the name? Normie Aras.
Where's she from?
She is a Sephardi young lady from Israel.
Wow.
She
So is he out
she is
there?
the one. She is the one. He told me.
Baruch Hashem.
Yes, I mean, lovely. So that's good news. So good news outweighs the bad news. Well, it will outweigh it when Brian's had his operation and he feels better.
Amen. B'ezras Hashem. He should feel better very, very soon.
Yeah.
Shalema also means complete recovery. For Shalema. Wow. Okay, so there's a lot happening, a lot's going on.
Yeah. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew.
You read that well. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. Okay, but before we get into what that means and how it says it so many times, we're going to talk about what's going on the calendar this week, what's going on in the Parsha, and then we'll get up to the idea of the Sikh that talks about a Jew is a Jew is a Jew is a Jew. But what's going on the calendar this week in general is that Parshas Emor, this week's Parsha, always falls out in the time of the Sfira So'omer. And fascinatingly, in Parshas Emor, we have the mitzvah, amongst other things, of counting the Sfira So'omer. So this week, in Parshas Emor, which happens to be in the month of Iyar, we make a major deal of counting days and days that count. When we say days that count, we mean that not only do the days have importance, that they are so worthy. We count each one of these days between Pesach and Shavuos. It's our role, it's our job, and we hope to achieve that our days should count. There should be days that have inside of them, every day is a day that is important. Important not only because they're important, but we give them importance. The Rebbe, throughout the years, would make a lot of major emphasis in the urgency of using out every moment. Very often, the Rebbe would come to a Farbrengen, and he would come, you could set your clock on the time that the Rebbe arrived at the Farbrengen. It was so precious every moment. He would walk in bang on time, rushing in, sing a niggun as you're coming in, and he would sit down to Farbrengen. And you imagine someone who's in a rush and an urgent type of mindset, the words and the Farbrengen would urgently move along. Yet we found that when the Rebbe would talk, there was nothing else going on. The whole world stopped. And that's all that was happening. Yet the moment the Farbrengen was over, the Rebbe was rushing out, and moving right along to the next thing. Similarly, when you had times where the Rebbe would go from one part and point in a schedule to the next, it was always no time to waste. Not because the Rebbe would have some sort of OCD or urgency where you can't stay still, ADHD or something like that, chas v'shalom, but because every moment was extremely important. The Rebbe once said at a Farbrengen that he's not going to say that time is short, but he will say that time is very precious. Another fascinating quote about the importance of time. The Rebbe once said that the world says that time is money. He says that time is life. Time is life. If you think about it, we can't replicate time. We can't extend time. But at the same time, time isn't short. Because saying that time is short is to imply that really I need to be doing something else in this space of time, but I don't have enough time to do what I need to do. But when the Rebbe says that time is life, life is godliness. Time doesn't belong to us. Time is Hashem's. And every moment that Hashem gives us is a calling for us to live up to the moment that we need to do right now. So time isn't short. Time is very precious. But it's exactly the length that it needs to be. And our workload matches that length of time. Now, we don't necessarily know what we need to achieve. We do know the compass, the direction in which we need to focus our time. And that's why often we feel the pressure of making sure that we're not wasting away the time and we're managing to achieve what needs to be done in the here and now. But really, it's not the achievement. It's that we're spending our time in the most effective way that we can. That's really where it's at. There was once one of the people who came to see the Rebbe apologized for taking the Rebbe's time. To which the Rebbe responded that, Mimanavshach, however you look at it, if this time is not supposed to be spent talking to you, then how could I stop doing what I'm supposed to be doing to talk to you? And if it's the right thing to do to spend time talking to you as a great individual, then there's nothing to apologize about, because time isn't mine. The Rebbe said to this individual, time belongs to Hashem. Time belongs to Hashem. The urgency of spending our time correctly is not in order to self-develop more independence or more self, in order to have more achievements, to be able to show for ourselves. That's not what makes time precious. What makes time precious is because every moment belongs to Hashem. So therefore, regardless of what the outcome of what I spent my time doing, it doesn't make it more or less effective. What does make it more or less effective is whether I was focused on what Hashem wanted me to do in this moment in time. And if I did, that's all the reason to celebrate. So what we're learning is that time is extremely precious. Time is so precious, you can't buy time. But at the same time, pun intended, time is also the mission and the outline that Hashem gives to us. We often know, the joke about the postcard. Whenever you get a postcard, you see the first line in the postcard is very big letters. The second line is slightly smaller, and the lower down in the postcard you go, the smaller the letters get, until eventually the writing goes all the way around and you're squeezing in the last words. And usually the idea is that when you first get a postcard, there's loads of space. What am I going to write in the postcard? I'll fill it up with big, massive letters. But as you start writing, all of a sudden I realize there's so much more to write. And there's even more to write. And I try and squeeze and cram in more and more. The size of the postcard was the same size from the beginning till the end. But my awareness of how precious each little bit of space is only develops as I go along. And perhaps the same is with time. Time is extremely precious. Time belongs to Hashem. When I don't realize that, I think I've got all the time in the world, whatever that means. So I don't necessarily appreciate the preciousness of time. But Sfiras Ha'Emer, the counting that we spend every day, Sfartem Lochem, every day we count a day, which is what we do this entire month. The full month of Iyar is a month of Sfiras Ha'Emer. And as we said, it ties into this week's Parshah. This is the week we're in, where every day counts, not because we have to have what to show for ourselves, because the results are not in our hands. Effort and focus is what we can try and aspire for, and that's what makes time precious. The beginning of today shouldn't be the big letters of the postcard, but should be an urgency in making sure that every part of today is fully switched on. I just want to end off this idea, this thought, by observing the difference, noting that people who are urgently trying to achieve are never at peace. Because even if I do manage to achieve, I'm always worried that maybe next time, or perhaps even this time, I could have achieved more, and I can never be satisfied, or I can never celebrate the work that I'm doing. Compared to when we manage to develop an urgency out of using the preciousness of Hashem's time as an ambassador for on behalf of Hashem, there's always a sense of celebration at every moment in time. Right now, I'm using the time that belongs to Hashem to the best of my knowledge, to the best of my ability, under the current circumstances. And results is not how we measure the usage of time. Okay, that's one idea of what's going on in the calendar. It happens to be that next Monday I will not be around. Next Monday evening will be just after the Shabbat in the Heights, New York Shabbaton, and therefore there probably won't be a shir. So I'm just going to throw in the next week we have Pesach Sheni, Yudalad Iyar, which would be always one of the major days that the Rebbe almost rejuvenated and turned into a highlight, similar to Chamishas B'Shvat, in which the celebration of Nishtakim Fafalim, the celebration of it's never too late, the celebration of having missed out on the entire Pesach. The people found out that Hashem extended the deadline. And as the Sikh has often explained, that a second chance is not about the number 2. The second chance is that it's never too late. Never too late. There's an infinite continued more chance. Because if the first time comes and goes, the only way you can still restore that which was missed is if we say we rise above that constraint of time. And once you rise yourself above the constraint, it's not just that you get one more chance. You know what? I'll give you a second life. It's not about a second life. It's about being able to accomplish that which was missed out. So that's the celebration coming up next week of Pesach Sheni. We celebrate and remind ourselves the energy that we have, what it takes, even if we messed up when there's no one else to blame. And there's no one else to point the finger at, we still go forward. We still pick ourselves up, Pesach Sheni forward. And then also, a week from Sunday will be the 33rd day of the Omer, Lag BaOmer, which of course is the celebration of Rabbi Akiva and his Talmidim who stopped passing away. And also closer to home is the celebration of his Talmud, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who passed away and called it his Hilula, the Simcha of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, who gifted us with the secrets of Torah. And the Kedai Rabbi Shimon Lismei Chalav B'Shas Atchak, Rabbi Shimon's Chos protects and safeguards the people, and our generation urgently needs major chosim to pull us through the finishing line and to make the Geula our reality. So that's a little bit what's going on the calendar right now. Let's shift into what's happening in Parshas Emor. So last week we discussed Parshas Kedoshim, the Parsha of staying holy, because Hashem had told us to do so. And this week we go into Parshas Emor. In the Parshas Emor, we have the opening of the Parsha that talks to Kohanim. It's almost like the Shulchan Aruch for the Kohanim. These opening psukim tell us how the Kohen has to behave, how the Kohen has to make different choices, starting off with the very opening, the word Emor, which means to say, which is an instruction for Moshe to tell the Kohanim to tell their children. A specific instruction that the older generation should instruct and educate the younger generation, so that we shouldn't say, oh, let them figure out themselves, let them do it their own way, but instead we should go and teach the halachas of the Kohanim, which is who they can marry, and the halachas of a regular Kohen and a Kohen Gadol. And then you have also the halachas of where they cannot go, as in they cannot come in contact with impurity in the sense of someone who's passed away, a dead body, with the exception of immediate family for most Kohanim. The Kohen Gadol cannot even do that. Who can the Kohen Gadol not marry? The Kohen Gadol cannot marry anybody who's been married before. And then we have also the Kohen who has a blemish, as in the sense he has a handicap, whether it's a full handicap from missing limb, or even something that's much more subtle than that. If the Kohen has a blemish, he cannot do the kar avoda, the service in the Beis HaMikdash. He has to have a complete body in order to serve. However, the pasuk does add, he would still, even if he's a handicapped Kohen, take part in the avodah of eating the karbonas, the kachim and the kachim kalim, and he would also get portions of the different things that were divided amongst the Kohanim. Once we're talking about deformities in the Qayyim, we also mentioned there an animal that would be brought as an offering also could not have a deformity or a handicap. Then we talking about when an animal cannot be brought as a carbon. There's another restriction in which animals cannot be brought up as an offering, even if it's from the species, the type of animal that can. Usually, there's a minimum age. An animal must be grown up, so to speak, and it has to be as a minimum 7 days old, and only on the 8th day can it be brought up. And that's how we learn about the halachas of which animals can and cannot be brought. Similarly, also the baby calf on the same day as its mother. The second half of the parsha deals with it's almost an entirely separate topic, and it basically goes through each of the festivals, each of the Yom Tovim on the calendar, one by one, and pointing out each Yom Tov, what is special about that Yom Tov. Starting off with the regular Shabbos, the Karbanos that were brought on Shabbos, and from there move straight into Pesach. Then on the 14th day of Nisan, you're going to have to bring the Karban Pesach, the Pesach lamb. And then on the 7th day of Pesach, which is also going to be a Yom Tov, we just had it, a Shvisha Pesach, again it'll be a day of special Karbanos. Straight in after Pesach, we learn what we discussed before, the mitzvah of bringing a Karban Omer, and the counting up to from the Karban Omer would be starting after the first day of Yom Tov, so what we would call the second day Yom Tov, which then would have been Chol HaMoed, and they would offer up the Karban, and from there they would count up from that day of Pesach all the way up to Shavuos, the harvest of the second day of Pesach. And after 49 days of counting the Omer, we then have the Yom Tov of Shavuos, which is on the 50th day. After 49 days of counting, again, there would be special Karbanos. Fascinating, just throw it in there. This makes Shavuos the only day on the calendar that was fixed and predictable in advance of the beginning of the month. How so? We nowadays look in the calendar and we can predict when Shavuos is going to be in 50 years from now. But in the good old days, when we didn't have a calendar, instead we would wait for the Beis Din to announce what day Rosh Chodesh is going to be based on the sighting of the moon. You couldn't know when Pesach was going to be, whether it would be Monday or Tuesday. You'd have to wait until they established which day of the week was Rosh Chodesh. Whether it would be that day, the 30th day would be Rosh Chodesh, or the 31st day would be Rosh Chodesh. Until they didn't start the new month, Pesach hadn't been fixed. And then you had 2 weeks to quickly establish and make your Pesach plans. And if you lived out of town, you would have to wait for the message to get through. If you lived out of the country, like we do, you'd have to just plan to have 2 days Yom Tov, like we do. The exception to the rule was Shavuos. Because once you knew what day Pesach was going to be, you just know that 49 days count, 50th day will be Shavuos. So that was the most predictable Yom Tov, was the Yom Tov of Shavuos. Which, by the way, also tells us that the fact that we have 2 days Shavuos outside of Eretz Yisrael is not because of Sveika D'Yoma. It's not because we weren't sure which day Shavuos would fall on. Unlike Pesach, or Rosh Hashanah, or Sukkot, or the other Yom Tovim, where we had to wait to find out which day would be Yom Tov, Shavuos was predictable. So why today do we have 2 days Shavuos? And the answer is like plug. It's a special established halacha from the Chachamim that Shavuos should always be 2 days. And of course, Chassidus will point out that although it seems less of a reason to have 2 days, actually it comes with additional strength, because the 2 days of Pesach that we just celebrated was a Safek 2 days, a second day based on an uncertainty, compared to Shavuos that's based on an absolute certainty. So that's a little fun facts that we pick up from this week's Parsha, establishing Shavuos is not based off the 5th day, the 6th day, or the 7th day of Sivan. It could be any of the above, and it's based on purely on what day Pesach fell out, and count 49 days, only 50 days Shavuos. Moving right along after Shavuos, we then learn the halachas of Shofar on Rosh Hashanah. Rosh Hashanah is the new year, and the mitzvah of the day is to hear the Shofar. On the 10th day of Tishrei, would be the day of Yom Kippur, the day of fasting. And that's the mitzvah of the day, to fast on that day. Moving right into Sukkot. Of course, the mitzvah of Sukkot is to live in a sukkah and to take a lulav and esrog. And that starts on the 15th day of Tishrei. And at the end of those on the 8th day, on Shmini, on the 8th day of Pesach would be Shmini Atzeres. Shmini Atzeres is a separate Yom Tov. Aside for the 7 days of Sukkot, the 8th day is an additional Yom Tov, although it's called the 8th, counting from Sukkot, it's still called Atzeres, its own Yom Tov. At the very end of the Parshah, after going through all the Yom Tovim, we have this discussion of lighting the menorah in the Mishkan and the Lechem Apanim that was placed on the Shulchan, on the table there every week. So this week's Parshah, first of all, has a lot to tell us in the halachas for the Kohanim. It also has a lot to tell us in the practical halachas of how we keep each of the Yom Tovim and what the prime mitzvah is. It also makes the basis for all the Yom Tovim we get to read this week's Parshah. Every Yom Tov we borrow from this week's Parshah, and in the end we end off with a few halachas for the Mishkan. So overall, Parshah's Emor, as you can imagine, is a loaded Parsha. We're going to zoom into one particular mitzvah that appears in this week's Parsha and zoom into this mitzvah. I just want to do, before we get into the Sikha, if anyone has any questions, comments, or suggestions, now's a good time, because I would like to share a story. I'm going to share a story which is the background to what this Sikha, when this Sikha was shared. And when I learned the Sikha, I didn't know the story. And once I heard the story, it lends a whole new importance or geschmack to this Sikha to understand what was going on. So the Sikha was said, I think, if I'm not mistaken, in the 70s. In Eretz Yisrael, and in Israel, there was very, very colorful diversity of different people who came from all sorts of different countries. And together in the melting pot of Eretz Yisrael, they formed a single state, nation, and they learned to live together more or less. And it's still a learning exercise that's still actively going on today. But often you would have people who were very, very polar opinionated. And sometimes the opinions are extreme and very strong opinions. But there's one particular politician or activist, eventually became a politician, who was very, very outspoken as a Marxist, somebody who was a socialist, and he believed, with his fullest belief, that actually, although communism was failing in the countries that it was being promoted, he believed that with a few correct tweaks, it was the way forward and it would save the world. And he was so strongly opinionated this way, it spilled over in his sense to where he, at every opportunity, self-bashed the Israeli people and did whatever he could to try and build up the non-Jewish population in Israel at the price of trying to self-denigrate, to push down Jewish people, claiming that everybody has to be more equal, even if the people he was promoting were causing much more trouble than help. But he was very, very adamant about this, very strongly outspoken. One day, I can't remember when it was a special opportunity, and this individual had gotten up and had made a scathing speech, like really tearing into everything that protected Jewish people, and more importantly, bad-mouthing, speaking down and speaking terribly against a lot of his fellow country people, fellow Yidden. And it created an enormous uproar. Even those who were somewhat of his fans were appalled by how far he had gone. But some people were more hurt than that. Because the next day, if I'm not mistaken, it was on a Yom Tov maybe? I can't remember. But the next day, he was in his apartment building. And as he was walking into the hallway, he was confronted by a Holocaust survivor who was fuming, burning mad, who pulled out a knife and literally stabbed the guy in the stomach, who was rushed to hospital. And Baruch Hashem, it wasn't such a terrible wound. And in a very short while later, he managed to recover and he was sent home and he finished recovering at home. So that was one of the colorful stories that Israel's known to have all sorts of. But what happened next is, in the Yediah Achronot, one of the newspapers had a column from a Rav who would write regularly in this column. So the next time this newspaper published his column, the words he wrote were basically along the lines of, it's a shame that the blade wasn't sharper and didn't go in deeper to finish this guy off once and for all. That's what his article read. So this Rav writes such a scathing article against the person who's whatever. And it happens to be a short while, maybe a week later, this Rav happened to be in New York. And this Rav happened to come by the Rebbe. And as he came by the Rebbe, I think it was for dollars or for Kasher Bracha, whatever it was, the Rebbe looks at him and says to him, how could you write such a thing about a fellow Jew? So the Rav figures the Rebbe doesn't really understand the weight of what this guy, the trouble this guy was creating, how far gone this individual was. He tries to explain, and the Rebbe wasn't hearing. And he says to him, let's meet again and I'll explain to you what the problem is. So this Rav gets an invitation. He feels like it's his obligation to go and explain to the Rebbe just how terrible of a guy this Yid is. So he comes to the secretary of the Rebbe and says he wants to make a yechidus. He wants to make a meeting with the Rebbe. The Rebbe told him to come. So the secretary says, no, there's no more yechidus. You don't get a meeting with the Rebbe. Probably what the Rebbe meant is that the next Farbrengen, come to the Farbrengen, and at the Farbrengen, the Rebbe will talk and explain to you in a way of Farbrengen. So until he understood that there wasn't going to be a meeting, so he agreed. He came to the Farbrengen. At that Farbrengen, this Sikha was the thrust of one of the major talks at the Farbrengen, and he got his answer loud and clear. And he understood what the Rebbe was saying, and this is the Sikha we're about to learn. The answer to why we never write off a Yid, let alone describe joy or an aspiration to chas v'sholem hurt another Yid. This is the content and the direction of the Sikha. One more just anecdote, one more just idea that's worth mentioning at the beginning. This same attitude of not talking bad about hurting a fellow Jew is really the same about every fellow human being. Because to talk about hurting another human being is not what human beings aspire to. We understand there's tremendous rachmanas, and some people are extremely dangerous. We don't aspire to hurt people. We do aspire to protect people. Nevertheless, the Sikha uses phraseology that specifically talks about Yidden. And in a healthy setup, it's important to remember, especially in a climate today where everybody is equal, whatever that's supposed to mean, and boundaries seem to fade away. It's important to understand that a healthy human being has an inner circle, a wider circle still, and a wider circle still yet. And a healthy human being protects their immediate family, even if they aren't perfect. And a healthy human being protects their community within reason, even if they are less than perfect. And a healthy human being feels for their country, even if they have shortcomings. And a healthy human being cares for every human being, even if they aren't perfect. And part of caring for each human being on every level that we just described includes also seeking to get them the help that they need for their own benefit, so that they don't hurt more people, or so that they learn from the mistakes, or so that they develop a better character, but in a quest to help out of respect for a fellow human being, country person, community member, family member. But it's also important to realize that those circles are different levels of boundaries. And inviting people into our circle is healthy as long as we keep the right people in the right circle. So if a community member starts taking more importance than a family member, something's not quite right. And therefore, talking about a fellow Yid before we talk about a fellow human being is healthy. Because if we can care more about our fellow Yidden, then we can care more about every single human being. This is something that you don't usually hear in today's day and age, but perhaps it's even more important now than ever to make sure that we appreciate that everyone being equal means that everybody needs to have their own circle. And in order for a human being to be healthy, their family has to be sacred. Every human is to be sacred, but blood should be thicker. Why are we saying that? Because we're about to discover that this approach to notice the good of a fellow human being, even if it means overlooking obvious and glaring shortcomings, is praiseworthy, is an aspiration, and it's not only not going to hurt us, it's going to put us in the best position to be able to develop. And this is going to be the title, A Jew is a Jew is a Jew is a Jew, appreciating the untouchable preciousness of every Jew. It's not burying your head in the sand, but it is choosing what to notice about a fellow Yid. And as we said, this will be the jump board from where we can go from there to every single human being and why. Let's start off from the beginning. And how the Sikha, remember we said this is the Sikha that the Rebbe said at that particular Farbrengen, and it was focused on a pasuk in this week's Parshah that describes the mitzvahs of Sukkot. We said we went through all the Yom Tovim. On the Yom Tov of Sukkot, we have a mitzvah to sit in a sukkah, in a hut that has a temporary roof made out of branches, made out of growth. And in addition to that, we have a second mitzvah made up of 4 parts. Let's read it inside. Or akachtem lechem b'yom harishon, pri'etz hadar, kapis tamarim, anafetz oves v'arvei nachal, usmachtem lifnei Hashem elekechem b'shavas yomim. Says the English, and you shall take for yourselves on the first day, as in the first day of Sukkot, a beautiful fruit of a tree. A beautiful fruit of a tree. Date palm fronds, a branch of a dense-leaved tree, and the willows of the brook. And you shall rejoice before your God for 7 days. Okay. Now, if you have been to a Sukkot celebration, if you have Sukkot memories, you'll remember that we take the lulav of the esrog, dasim, and aravis. The citrus fruit, the palm branch, the myrtle branches, and the willow branches. And they're tied together, and you hold those esrog with them, and you shake them all directions. It's great. But here we're reading it the way it is in the pasuk, the way the text says it. Which one of these is the description of an esrog? Help me out. Which one of these words describe the esrog?
Beautiful fruit of a tree.
Oh, a beautiful fruit of a tree. It's an interesting way of describing an esrog. A beautiful fruit of a tree. It's a bit vague, to say the least. I mean, I can think of different fruits that are also beautiful. Some of them taste great. Some of them look gorgeous. Some of them have both. But for somehow, the description that the pasuk uses to describe the esrog is a beautiful fruit of a tree. Okay, kapis tamarim, date palm fronds. Okay, that's a little easier. But here's the next one, a branch of a dense-leaved tree. Which tree is that? Which tree is the dense-leaved tree? Anyone?
Is that the myrtle?
Correct. That is the myrtle, because the other one left is the willow brook, is the willow of the brook, and therefore we know that's the myrtle one. But that's also, again, an interesting way to describe the myrtle branch. I mean, there are many trees, I'm sure, that are densely leaved. Somehow, we are to know this. I mean, obviously, we have Torah Shabbat, but let's start off with the first one. Specific descriptions in the Torah teach us important laws about the 4 species, and that's going to be the key. When we learn science, there are certain things that are facts, and then based off the facts, we then extrapolate what we can deduce and derive from the facts. and the facts are non-changing, the deductions are calculations based off those facts. The facts are non-changing. The deductions sometimes do, sometimes don't. When it comes to the Torah, the letters and the words in the written text are like the facts. They are not up for discussion. They have never been changed and will never be changed. What we need to figure out, though, from those words, that is what we deduce and figure out from the facts. Those are the rules that come up from the established, non-changing, steadfast axioms. So what the words of the Torah say are written in that particular way, and what we deduce from them are very important laws. And the same is true with the descriptions that the Torah uses for these particular fruit, and they're going to teach us very specific rules. Let's see, starting off with how the Shulchan Aruch learns the laws of Esrog from that interesting description. Now don't forget, the Torah doesn't write vowels, and therefore, although it says pre-Eitzara, a beautiful fruit, we're going to learn that the word Hadar could be read beautiful and also has additional meanings. Let's read inside text 2. This is from the Shulchan Aruch, the Code of Jewish Law that describes the laws of Esrog and refers us back to the pasuk we read. Says the Shulchan Aruch, there is no maximum limit to the size of an esrog. It's valid even if it's so big that it must be carried on one's shoulder. There's no maximum size. There is, however, a minimum limit. What's the minimum limit? An esrog smaller than the size of an egg is invalid. Because most esrogim grow no less than the size of an egg, hence the fact that an esrog has not grown to that size shows that it's not fully grown, and the Torah expression fruit of a tree implies that fruit that is complete. So if you have an unripe or non-grown or non-fully grown esrog, meaning it's too small and it hasn't passed the minimum size, we will know the law will be it's not a kosher esrog because it uses the word fruit of a tree. Interesting. So by not just saying esrog, by saying the word fruit, it's taught us an important law that there's a minimum size just by using that terminology. Moving right along, you have the next description. The term date palm fronds connotes a lulav that grows in a date palm. Now, since the Torah uses the term kapois tamarim instead of leaves of date palm, ale tamarim, it says fronds rather than leaves. We learn that the leaves must be such that they can be brought together and bound together with the spine because they are still pliable. The leaves cannot have hardened. This concept is derived because vowels are not written in the Torah, and the words kapois can also mean kafos, meaning bound, and therefore, if a person lets the lulav grow long enough on the tree, the lulav branches will spread out and harden and won't be able to be bent back in towards the spine, and at that point will no longer be a kosher lulav. Because kapois teaches they have to be bindable, pliable enough that you can tie them. It can happen that the lulav remains on the date palm until its leaves become stiff as wood, and they spread out and become separated from the spine. As the stiffer they become, the more they spread away from the spine. In such a case, we determine if the leaves have become so firm they can no longer be bound together with the spine. If this is indeed the case, the lulav is invalid. Here's another one. What's the story of the dense leaf trees? Unless at least 3 leaves emerge from a single point, 3 or more leaves are positioned next to each other in a circle around the stem on the same level, none of them being lower than the other. Even though they do not emerge from a single root, if they are very close to each other and stand on an equal plane in one circle, they are considered dense-leaved. However, if 2 leaves stand on an equal plane, very close to each other, and the 3rd leaf emerges on a higher level than the other 2, then it's no longer a kosher hadas. Interesting. Each little piece teaches us something. That's all that you would imagine from the pasuk until you get to number 4. And this is what we want to focus on. Because when we get to number 4, it seems to change its mind. An arava whose top was severed, or its leaves were torn, or if it's a tzafzafa, a species similar to, but not actually a willow, any of the above, invalid. an arava that is slightly dried, or if a
Which is
minority of
a
its leaves, or a minority of its leaves fell off, or if it grew in a field, as in it didn't grow next to a brook, then it's still valid. So this is what we have. The arava, although it cannot be chopped at the top, can't have all the leaves torn off, it can't be roundish, non-long leaves, because that's a taftafa. However, if it's slightly dried, or only some of the leaves fell off, or if it did not grow by a brook, it grew in a regular field, it would still be valid kosher. Okay, by the way, becomes an issue when the leaves are torn off. Very common in this country where the climate is very wet and the leaves become black. Still not so much of a problem, but when they start falling off and you have most of your leaves falling off your arava, then it becomes a serious issue for your lulav. Something to bear in mind when it comes to sukkahs. We've got time here. Says Rashi, what does it mean it grew in a field? The arava grew in a field, not by a brook of water. And this is where it starts getting interesting. Because if you remember, that slide that we had with the original pasuk seemed to say that the description of a willow is a willow of a brook. Is a willow of a brook. The brook is almost part of the description of the willow tree. And what we're about to see is that for some reason, when it comes to the willow tree, says the Yebrosa Cairo, the willows of the brook that the Torah speaks of refers to a specific species that is known by that name. It's an elongated, if you read that right, leaf, similar to a brook. The edges of the leaf are smooth and has a red stem. The species mostly grows by a brook, which is why it's called willows of the brook. However, says the Shulchan Aruch, even if it grew in the desert or in the mountains, it is valid. Okay, so 1 second, let's just, we'll calculate. If the species doesn't match up to the precise description provided in the Torah, it's invalid. For some reason though, by the willow, we will waive that rule. So if you had an esrog that didn't exactly match the description of the Torah, even though it's part of the same species, no good. If you have a palm branch, but it's already spread open, it's part of the same species, we say no, it's no longer any good. You have a myrtle branch, but it doesn't match up to the exact description of the Torah, no good. Same species, no good. When it comes to the willow, for some reason, the strictness, the stringency of the rules derived or implied by the pasuk are not taken up. For some reason, the description of the willow is waived. And what we want to do is figure out what's the difference. Why is it when it comes to the first three, we're so careful? And that's the halacha. You wouldn't make a bracha on the small esrog. But when it comes to willow, it's okay. So for starters, the Gemara asks the question, not how come, but how do we know? From where do we derive this? And the Gemara figures it out because it says Arvei Nachal. The answer is Arvei is plural, implying that any type of willow would be valid, and therefore there's an implication in the Torah. So it's not a halachic question, how come? But the question isn't so much how come, the question is why? For what reason was the Torah that much more lenient? So let's say the halacha the Gemara deals with. But the question of what was the reason that the willow was waved by so easily, so much more than any of the other three. Now, there is a lot of debate and discussion on this, and there really isn't very strong answers to this question on the basic understanding. And at this Farbrengen, at this particular Sikha, the Rebbe suggested a rule that is often used in Chassidus that tells us that sometimes a verse needs to be explained on a deeper level because on the basic level, although you could figure it out, we're left wanting. What do we mean on a deeper level? So here's a short read that tells us about the Pshat, Remesh, Drus, Soid, the 4 levels in which we generally discuss Torah. The acronym for that is the paradise. The first level of the paradise is the pei, which is pshat. This is number one. It is the simple interpretation of the Torah. When the pasuk says, "Bereshis bara Elokim," in the beginning, God created heaven and earth, it means exactly what it seems to mean, in a very literal sense. That in the beginning of all of creation, it was the heaven and earth that was created first, or the beginning of the creation of heaven and earth. That's what happened. Pshat. A second layer on that same pasuk reads a little deeper into that same pasuk, and this is known as remes, allusion, hints. And these are the hints and allusions that are contained within the Torah. One of the methodologies the Torah employs to make these hints is called gematria, numerical value, and the remes of numerical value, the letters of the Hebrew alphabet. For example, the gematria of Bereshis bara happens to be the same gematria, is numerical equivalent to Rosh Hashanah Nivra Ha'olam. The world was created on Rosh Hashanah. The number is 1116, and if you add up the letters that form the word Bereshis bara, you'll get the same amount as Rosh Hashanah Nivra Ha'olam. Amazing. So on the basic understanding, we just know that the world was created. But it hints to, by way of gematria, the letters used to formulate those words hint to a deeper layer that actually give us the date on which this event took place. And that date is the date of Rosh Hashanah, hinted to in the same words, an allusion, deeper layer. It goes deeper still. Number 3 takes it one step further and says, actually, there's something called midrash or drush, expounding upon the deeper meaning of the verse. The word Bereshis, in the beginning, the Midrash tells us that this word can be split into 2 words, Bereshis, base rashis, implying base, the letter base is 1, 2, the number 2, rashis first. The world was created for the sake of 2 rashis, the 2 firsts, the Yidden, the Jew, and the Torah, who are charged with a mission of making the world a better place through the Torah. Although it's not the simple interpretation of the word, nevertheless, it's a true and valid way of understanding the Torah. It's a deeper layer still of delving into the deeper meaning of the same word. So we're not saying that the world was created a different way or a different day. We're just saying an additional layer is to understand a little bit about the purpose, the goal of creation. And then you get to sight. And it's a deeper layer still, the esoteric, the mystical part of the Torah. The Tikkunei Zohar gives actually 70 different explanations, 70 explanations on the word Bereshis. But that same word explains, one of them is Bereshis, bara shis. The word Bereshis can be split into 2 words, bara shis. Shis means 6 in Aramaic, bara means created. God created 6 heavenly, emotional powers by which Hashem interacts with creation. If you've done any Kabbalah, you would have come across the 10 Sefirot. 6 of them are the emotional spheres before Malchus, and those are the Shis, the 6 points with which Hashem created heaven and earth, and that's alluded to, or it's hinted to, it's the mystical side of the very same word, Bereshis. Barashis, Hashem created 6 tools or modes with which he operates creation in and with. So there you have one word, but layer upon layer of exactly the same word. They don't argue, they just uncover deeper and deeper ideas in the same word, and that's just one word. And as we said, the Zohar has 70 explanations on that one word. And of course, there's more to go. So that's the general idea of having one concept in the Torah and layers upon layers. Now, using this idea, this concept of having layers in the same word, we could say that although we don't know on the basic understanding why Hashem was not bothered so much on the specifics of the willow, even though Hashem was very specific on the other 3, but if we move on from Pshat and we go to one of the other levels, we could very well understand this concept. We could borrow a different mode of understanding and thereby have a very good explanation as to why the willow is different. Just by way of example, Here you have a quote from a Rashi. And Rashi boasts at the opening of his entire explanation of the whole Torah, saying, my role is going to be to focus only on Pshat, simple meaning. That's all I'm going to do. Yet, in this particular quote, in the very opening of the Torah, he says this verse is one of the exceptions. This verse demands a midrashic, deeper explanation. It cannot be understood in its basic, simple understanding. So although most of the Torah is explained in its basic forms, some of the exceptions must dig a little deeper because the basic understanding leaves us wanting. And that's the same sort of idea that we're going to do here for the Willow Arava question. Why is the Arava given so much leeway when the other three are so exacting? Let's do it. Let's jump right in. The way we're going to understand it is by going into the drush, the midrash of the four items that we take in the Lulav and Esrog, Hadassim and Arabis, the palm, the citrus, the myrtle, and the willow. What's the midrash of it? So we've heard this before, and we're going to skim through it. The Esrog has a taste and a smell. The palm branch has dates and therefore has a taste, but it has no smell. The densely leaved tree, which is the myrtle, has a lovely smell. There's no berries on a myrtle tree. And the willow has not a taste and not a smell. Now, to put it into simple understandings, when you stand next to a person who's got a lovely perfume or a nice smell, it's pleasant. However, when you enjoy the taste of a delicious fruit, you're taking in, you're imbibing, you're ingesting goodness. So to compare those to two major achievements of a person, the good smell would represent good deeds. It's pleasant to be next to a person who's a nice, kind, good deed person. It's like a good smell. Equally, someone who's studied a lot and is a scholar and is learning Torah has taken in, has ingested good taste. So the scholar is the one who has good taste. And the kind, good deed person is the person who has a good smell. And some people have both. The Esrog, the Lulav has a taste, scholar. And the myrtle, the Hadassim, has a good smell. It's pleasant to be next to, good deeds. And the Arava has none. Not famous for the good deeds. No do-gooder, or no good doer. And no scholar either. Doesn't have the time to study, or the mind. So now that the willow's been explained to be the person who represents the Jew, who has no Torah and no good deeds, who can be any kind of Jew, but isn't. Thus, the Torah-specific descriptions are not legally binding. This individual, not only are we going to be extra giving and turn a blind eye, no, it's much more than that. This fella, this person, who's just not nice to be around and doesn't know or hasn't studied any Torah, this little person has a different type of value. What's the Arava's value? The Arava's value isn't anything else other than the absolute core of who they are. None of the achievements are shining, but who they are is what you could see without any other distortion, distraction. Let's see it inside. We unite with the Aravas, the Jews who possess neither Torah nor good deeds, just because they are part of the tribe. Simply being a Jew is an essential, intrinsic quality that every Jew possesses just by virtue of being a descendant of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is true even if in practice they possess neither Torah nor good deeds. In fact, even if they are completely assimilated and don't even know that they are Jewish, it doesn't change who they are. And that, being who they are, is the exact and only intrinsic value that the Arava has. This is the Arava's value. Who it is, who they are, who he and she actually is. And that is the advantage of the Arava, because there's nothing else to distract it. It's a cute story. I'm going to say it very quickly. In Poland, in the early 20th century, few Jewish students were allowed to attend medical school. The only catch was they had to apply their own Jewish categories. They had to find in Jewish their own bodies to be able to learn medical research on. Familiar with the problem of Jewish law of the second Jewish bodies, the students approached the foremost halachic authority at the time, Chaim Moshe Grodetsky, and they proposed that in order to gain entrance to medical school, they be allowed to use the bodies of deceased Jews of ill repute or criminals. Any other criminals, let us take their bodies. At least we'll be able to do something useful with it. The rabbi, after recovering from the shock of the suggestion, responded, for me to allow that, I would have to know what God thinks about those people. End of conversation. So we think because they were a criminal, therefore this, that, and the other. A Jew is a Jew is a Jew. They may have made bad choices in life, but who are they? They. And this is the key. And a Rava Jew is important simply because they are Jewish. And every Jew is equal and an equal member of Hashem's chosen people. This is why the Arava is given leeway. Not because they're not important, but because on the level that they are connecting, the details don't matter. Of course, on achievement level, we don't aspire or emulate them. But on the connection level, on the reason why they're part of the bind, on that level, there are no differences. And this is the quote from the Baal Shem Tov, as brought down by the Friedrich Rebbe: we must love and cherish the simplest Jew as much as the greatest scholar, just because he or she is a Jew. And we will have one Father. You are the children of your God, and I love you, says Hashem, because you're my children. So here we go. Where's it going? Our teacher, the Baal Shem Tov, spoke very much about three loves: that of a fellow Jew, that of the Torah, and that of Hashem, thereby exposing the essence of what a Jew is. The legal portion of the Torah may declare a certain Jew as unfit. For example, gamblers are unfit to give testimony. There are certain Jews who even after they make a bracha, we don't answer amen, and that's in the halacha of what we can and can't count them in. However, according to the soul of the Torah, every yid is inherently good, and every yid is responsible for one another. No one has the liberty to say, oh, I'm a scholar, I'm a pious man who puts 3 pairs of tefillin on. Why should I bother with someone else? Just as two partners won't tell one another, look at, we're in this together. Whatever your business is my business, and there's no such thing as fighting against each other, so must it be with every yid. And therefore, not just in a moral or an ideal do we suggest that this is something we should live towards. It plays itself out in the halachas of the Arava on the willow branch, that when it comes to choosing a willow branch, even if this willow branch doesn't match the exact description of what the Torah uses, willows of the brook, the Torah insists on using plural language, arvei nachal, to remind us that when it comes to the level of willow, on that level, don't look at the details. Don't look at the details, instead look at the core of who's inside. And one's Jewishness can never be diminished. What's the message for us? The message for us is that sometimes it seems so counterintuitive to cherish someone who's so far gone, to cherish someone who has nothing to show for themselves. And the Baal Shem Tov is inculcating into us, in this week's Parshah, the ability to see past the veneer, see past even the halachic requirement of what we can and cannot do with this particular individual when it comes to doing mitzvahs, but of who they are. There's nothing less, and there's no difference. Arvei nachal, every single one is included. Hashem should give us the koyach, the joy, the simchas achayim, the knowledge of the pleasure of life, of knowing that when we do the right thing, we don't have to judge anybody else. We don't have to feel inferior or feel like defensive that we have to outdo somebody else. And when we have that sort of confidence, then Hashem allows us the clarity to be able to see the good of who a person is, even if you can't find the good in what they have done. Should be a gebench devach, should be blessed with every moment should count, and every moment should give us chayes to continue doing more good things. And when it comes to Pesach Sheni, please God, this year we'll bring a carbon Pesach in Yerushalayim or Kodesh, and we'll celebrate Lag Ba'im with Rabbi Shimon by Yochai himself and Rabbi Akiva Be'ez Hashem. Thank you very much for joining, everybody. Have a blessed week ahead.
Thank you.
Bye.